Hey there, 8th grade learners. Welcome to today's Explainer. I am absolutely thrilled you're tuning in because today we're going to look at the world just a little bit differently. If you've ever stared at a complex math problem and thought it looked like total chaos, well, I'm here to let you in on a little secret. There is actually a beautiful, predictable order hidden right there on the page. We're diving into the order of quadratics, key features, and godly patterns. And we're going to see how finding structure in math isn't just about passing your next test, it's about learning how to read the stories hidden in numbers. Let's get right into it.
Okay, let's dive into this. Here is our roadmap for today. First, the principle of order. Second, 4 key graph features. Third, reading the math story. Fourth, real-world parabolas in action. Fifth, test your knowledge. And finally, education with morality.
Section 1. The Principle of Order.
So our foundation for math today actually starts with a pretty powerful piece of scripture. 1 Corinthians 14:40 says, "Let all things be done decently and in order." The curriculum emphasizes that the universe operates on specific laws, and honestly, math is simply the language we use to observe and understand those incredibly designed laws.
And that brings us to the why behind our lesson today. Just like our lives thrive when we have structure and truth, quadratic graphs follow perfectly predictable patterns. When you look at a graph, you aren't just staring at some random, meaningless curve on grid paper, you are actually looking at a story. And understanding that story lets us problem solve in real life. It lets us predict profits for a business, track flying objects in physics, or analyze data trends. When you learn how to spot these features, you are essentially learning how to read the future of that equation. How cool is that? Moving right along to Section 2, 4 key graph features. Okay, the very first feature you need to know is the vertex. The vertex is the turning point of the graph. Depending on which way that U-shape is facing, it's either the absolute highest peak of the mountain or the lowest, deepest valley. It is literally the climax of our math story, the exact moment where everything turns around.
Next up, we have the axis of symmetry. Imagine drawing a perfectly straight vertical line right down the middle of your graph, cutting straight through that vertex we just talked about. This line basically splits the graph into 2 perfect mirror halves. So the really crucial takeaway here is that whatever happens on the left side of this invisible line is perfectly reflected on the right side. It's the ultimate display of mathematical balance and order.
Our third feature is the y-intercept. Now, this is exactly where the graph crosses the vertical y-axis. Mathematically, this happens when x equals 0. I actually like to think of the y-intercept as the starting line of our story. Think about it. Before any time has passed or any forward movement has happened on the x-axis, where are we starting? Well, that is your y-intercept.
And finally, the fourth feature, the x-intercepts. You're also going to hear these called roots or zeros. This is simply where the graph touches or completely crosses the horizontal x-axis. If the y-intercept is where our story starts, the x-intercepts often tell us where our story touches the ground, or where it literally hits 0.
Section 3, reading the math story.
Let's take a second to slowly and deliberately walk through a real example. Say we have the function f of x equals x minus 2 squared. Let's look at the perfectly ordered features of this equation. The vertex, our lowest turning point, sits exactly at the coordinates 2, 0. And because the vertex is at an x value of 2, our axis of symmetry is that vertical line x equals 2. Our y-intercept, which is our starting line when x is 0, is way up at 0, 4. But notice the x-intercept, it's at 2, 0. Wait a minute. That is exactly the same as our vertex. What that means is this specific curve comes down, just barely kisses the x-axis at 2, 0, and then turns right back around.
Let's see how this builds in a slightly different scenario. And this brilliantly illustrates what happens when a graph crosses the axis twice. Let's take the equation f of x equals negative x squared plus 6x minus 8. Right off the bat, because of that negative sign at the front, this parabola opens downward, kind of like a frown. Our vertex, which is now the highest peak, is at 3, 1. The mirror line, or axis of symmetry, is x equals 3. Our starting point, the y-intercept, is way down at 0, negative 8. But check out the x-intercepts. We actually have 2 of them this time, 2, 0 and 4, 0. The graph breaks upward through the ground, peaks at the vertex, and then comes right back down through the ground again.
Section 4. Real-world parabolas in action.
Now, I really want you to challenge yourself here. If a quadratic graph models the path of a soccer ball kicked into the air, what story does it tell? Before I give you the answer, try to visualize it in your head.
You kick a ball, it goes up, it reaches a peak, and then gravity pulls it back down to the grass. How do those 4 math features we just learned actually map on to that physical action?
All right, here's the translation from abstract math to real-world action. Step 1 is the y-intercept. When time is at 0, the ball is just sitting right there at the kicker's foot. So the y-intercept represents the ball's initial height when kicked. Step 2 is the vertex. As the ball flies upward, it eventually hits a maximum height before falling. That highest peak, that's our vertex. And finally, step 3, the x-intercepts. The ball comes back down and smacks into the grass. The x-intercept represents the exact time the ball hits the ground. See? It is not just some boring equation, it's the literal physics of the real world, elegantly described by math.
Section 5. Test your knowledge. All right, it's time to tackle your homework tasks. And let me tell you, I am incredibly confident that you now have all the tools you need to solve these perfectly. You're going to identify the features of a new equation, sketch a vertex at 1, -2, and draw its axis of symmetry. You'll also explain what x-intercepts mean in real-world contexts, figure out what a downward opening graph tells us about the vertex, and list the key features for a final equation. I want you to approach these not as chores, but as puzzles, where you get to reveal the hidden order.
Section 6. Education with Morality. The Hero Smart Academy Godly Learner series intertwines biblical morality with education for a very specific reason. The curriculum argues that education without morality will ultimately hurt. Think about it for a second. What is the point of being highly intelligent, supposedly educated, and able to graph a perfect parabola if you just continue to make bad, chaotic choices in your life that hurt yourself and the people around you? The series posits that just being smart isn't enough. We need biblical morality combined with education to truly live a life of order, truth, and purpose.
And this brings us to an incredible promise highlighted in the text. Romans chapter 8, verses 6 through 7 is cited as promising peace of mind to everyone who keeps his or her mind spiritual. The curriculum suggests that just as we found immense satisfaction in discovering the predictable, comforting order of a mathematical graph, we find ultimate peace when our minds are aligned with spiritual order. This is the experience of so many who engage with this kind of learning. The chaos of the world just sort of fades away when you center yourself on divine truth.
So I want to leave you with this final provocative thought from the curriculum. Will you choose to align your education with the divine order that brings true peace of mind? Math is beautiful because it reflects the order of its creator. As you go out and solve your homework, and more importantly, as you go out into the world and make choices, I encourage you to actively seek that order. Thank you so much for joining me in this explainer today. Keep learning, keep seeking truth, and I'll catch you next time.